welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I am starting a weekend reading vlog. It's actually been a while since I've done a weekend reading vlog, so it's kind of exciting. It's been a while. It's gonna be a busy weekend in terms of catching up and doing things because it's been a really crazy week, and next week my parents are coming into town to visit, so I'm trying to do as many things in advance as I can so that way I can spend as much time with them as I can. All that to say, I don't know how great the B-roll is going to be for this reading vlog, but that's okay. The reason that I am doing this reading vlog is because I am buddy reading some books with some friends, and I really wanted to vlog my experience reading this. On the last live reading sprints that I did on my channel, I was talking about Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden. I grew up reading and loving Nancy Drew, but I know a few people who actually grew up with Trixie Belden, and they said that they vastly preferred Trixie Belden to Nancy Drew. And when I mentioned that, I had a few people who were like, we should read them together and compare them. And so that is what I'm doing this weekend with Stephanie from Miss Richards Reads and our friend Joanna. And so we are going to be reading the first book in each series. So I do have The Secret of the Old Clock by Carolyn Keene. This is the very first Nancy Drew book that ever came out. I have read it before, but not in recent days. And then I have the first Trixie Belden book, which is The Secret of the Mansion. And to be honest, her expression just kind of cracks me up on this. Based on the cover, I thought that Trixie Belden was a lot more recent than Nancy Drew, but when I was looking at the dates inside the books, it looks like this book was originally published in 1930, and Trixie Belden, this first book, was originally published in 1948. And I thought that Trixie Belden was more like 60s or later or something like that. I thought it was quite a bit more recent, so I'm kind of surprised that the first book in these series were only published 18 years apart. That being said, I'm sure that, you know, the 40s and the 30s, there are differences, especially since the early 30s and then the late 40s. So it will be interesting to compare that aspect as well. Also, based on the covers, I would assume that Trixie Belden's books might be just a little bit more juvenile because Trixie Belden is younger. I want to say she's 12 or 13. And Nancy, I wanted to say she was 18, but maybe she's 16. I don't know. She is older though, but they are both middle grade mysteries. So these will be my primary focus books this weekend. I'm sure that both of them will be quite dated. When I read a Nancy Drew book, I think it was in fall of 2021, I did find some of the things in it quite dated. So I'm not sure how it's going to be with Trixie Belden, but it will be interesting, and I'm super looking forward to sharing this reading experience with you. Saturday, and last night I did finish Nancy Drew, The Secret of the Old Clock. So I do have some thoughts. First of all, so much of this was really nostalgic reading this. I didn't really remember the plot of this one. I don't think this was one of my favorites that I read over and over again, but it was really obvious a lot of what was going on, especially the title kind of gives away some things, which is kind of funny because the clock in the title doesn't come in till later. Also, my dog and my cat are playing, so if you're hearing a lot of moving around, it's that. Parts of it are just a little cheesy and feel kind of dated, but as the story went on, it seemed like more interesting and more fun and all that kind of stuff. I thought like the last third of the book was like super just enjoyable for me, but either way it was a really quick read and it was really nostalgic and fun. Something that I thought was really interesting about Nancy Drew in general is the fact that she's an older protagonist, because in middle grades, usually they try to make sure that it's children around the same age as the age that they're gearing towards, or maybe towards the upper end. Like you might have a 12 or 13-year-old at a book aimed at 8 to 12-year-olds. That's a pretty big difference compared to who the series is geared towards. So that's an interesting choice, and I wonder if it's because they were trying to set Nancy up as like a good role model, although you wouldn't want young children doing the things that Nancy Drew does, sneaking around in very unsafe situations. I also thought it was very interesting that when there are unsafe situations, her dad is just like, well, that wasn't safe, but I'm glad you're okay, and I'm glad you got the answers you needed, which is really funny because her mother's passed away and her dad is like decidedly not protective of her, which is just kind of funny. There was no Bess or George or Ned in this book. And when I think of Nancy Drew, I usually think of Bess and George being there with her and Ned making quite a few appearances as well. But I reread book 2 in the Nancy Drew series like probably a year and a half ago or something like that. And Bess and George weren't in that one either. So I'm really curious which book they end up in. There's a list of like the first 6 on here. And I'm guessing Bess and George end up in one of these, but I don't know which one because they're not in either of the first 2 books. So that's kind of funny. So yesterday was super busy, and the only reading that I got done at all was the Nancy Drew book. I read it before I went to bed and got through it kind of quickly, and I haven't had much of a chance to read this morning either. I just have a really big to-do list, and this is the weekend that I decided to do a page count challenge on my Patreon. I decided to do 500 pages because between Trixie, Belden, and Nancy Drew, I would be over 400 pages, like a little bit over that. And I wanted to finish part 1 of Demons, which is like 30 pages. And I'm like, I could totally do that, or at least come close. So with finishing Nancy Drew, that is 180 pages out of the 500 pages. So I do still need to start Trixie, Belden, but tonight on my channel, I am having a live with Stephanie, which is going to be super fun because we are buddy reading these books together, and she started with Nancy Drew also. So it's going to be really fun to talk to her and kind of like see what her thoughts have been thus far. And I don't know if she's already finished it. I have to check in and see. So I'll probably start Trixie, Belden on the live tonight. But it's been a super productive morning over here. There's still lots of stuff I need to get done, but I'm making a lot of progress on my to-do list, which is really exciting because I felt super, super overwhelmed yesterday. And then my afternoon was completely gone because I had to go meet with someone unexpectedly about something. And there was like 3 hours gone that I thought I was going to have. So that was a whole nother thing. But it was good, and I'm glad. It just meant that lots of things got pushed off to today. But I've already checked like probably like 8 things off my to-do list this morning. So I'm doing good. I'm making progress. So I will check in with you again later after I start Trixie, Belden. Hello friends, it is Sunday and I did finish Trixie, Belden. So I'm going to share my thoughts. My dog is in here with me. Don't know if you hear that snoring, but if you hear noises and snoring, it's my dog. He's in here with me and he's not a quiet dog. So anyways, last night I had reading sprints on my channel with Stephanie and that was super fun. We were just having a blast and laughing together a lot about some of the things in Trixie, Belden. So yes, so I finished The Secret of the Mansion and I don't even know exactly what to say without being spoilery. So Trixie is this girl that lives in the country, and there are like two mansions near where they live. They live in this little country house. One of the mansions is like old and run down, and there's like a cranky old man who lives there. And then this new family moves into the other mansion. This girl here is like the daughter of the people who move in there, and so Trixie kind of like becomes friends with her. Then they end up at the beginning of the book discovering that there is someone inside this mansion, even though the old cranky man who lived there has been like rushed to the hospital because he's really, really ill. And they go inside and discover this boy that's in there, and it's hilarious to me, some of the things, because when they decide to go in there, Trixie is like, oh, well, if there's anyone in here, it's probably a tramp, and I can just tell him I'm gonna call the police and he'll leave. It'll be fine. And I was just like, you think that an adult tramp is going to listen to a 13-year-old girl when like no one even knows you're here, no one knows you went there? And there's a lot of that in this book. Like, no one knows where you are, and you were doing these extremely dangerous things. And when I was talking to Stephanie was just like, where are their parents? Like, I know this was written in a different time, but they have no clue where their children are, and there's like some very dangerous things that happen. And I felt like so many of the scenes in this book were like over the top, to the point where I was just laughing. I was like, what is going on? And like, none of the adults know anything that has happened until you get to the very end of the book, and there's this man, this lawyer, who shows up, and he finds out that Trixie and her friend Honey went into this abandoned house and thought that there was a tramp there. And he's like, first of all, that's illegal for you to have literally climbed in the window of someone else's house when they weren't home. And second of all, did you really think that a homeless man would have listened to you and not done anything? And I was like, finally an adult is telling these children. And then they're like, oh my gosh, we're so sorry. And he's like, well, I know you'll never do it again, so it's fine. So he still doesn't tell their parents. It's never really addressed. And I'm like, I'm glad you're sure that they'll never do this again, because I'm sure that they will. So it was just an interesting experience reading this. And a lot of it, there were just quotes and things in it that I'm like, what? Like, it just was very, very entertaining. And I really actually ended up kind of enjoying it anyway, even though I'm being kind of critical right now. But I felt like the writing was actually pretty decent. I felt like the writing was better than the Nancy Drew book that I read. It's just like more descriptive, and I feel like the writing style, I like it better. Even though, I mean, it was written in the 40s, so it's not like it is super recently written or anything like that, but it is still more recent than Nancy Drew. It's like 18 years newer than Nancy Drew, and it feels a lot more modern. I do think that the ending to this was pretty obvious, and I saw a lot of it coming, but the same thing is true with Nancy Drew. Like, Nancy Drews are not difficult to figure out. So if we're comparing the two books, because that's what this vlog was for, do I like Trixie Belden more than Nancy Drew now that I have read them both? I will say that out of these two particular books, I think maybe that the Trixie Belden book is a little bit more enjoyable for me personally, but I don't feel that way overall, because I don't think that this Nancy Drew book was actually a very strong Nancy Drew book. I think that it's probably the weakest Nancy Drew out of maybe all of them, and we're missing a lot of the main characters that come in later, like her cousins Bess and George, and her boyfriend Ned, and like all these people that are like iconic parts of Nancy Drew books. They're not in there, and the first like third of the book feels like incredibly cheesy, and then some of the action picks up. I do love Nancy as a character. I think that she's so wholesome and sweet, and I love her selflessness in this book a lot. And I like Trixie because I think that Trixie, she was so obnoxious at the beginning of this book, but she really changes and grows as a person in this book, and kind of learns how to be a better friend and to be more thankful for what she has and be more appreciative and things like that. And so I do think that she grows, and so I think that Trixie Belden is probably a much more relatable protagonist for middle schoolers, whereas Nancy is just kind of like this perfect girl, and she's older, so I don't think she's necessarily as relatable. I feel like maybe she was written that way to be a good role model, but I enjoyed reading both of these, and I actually want to continue and read the next Trixie Belden book, because the way that this one ends, I am just like, it's setting it up for the next book, and I'm like, there's no way, that's not what they're doing. And then I read the synopsis of the next book, and I'm like, nope, that's what they're doing. So like, it feels like a train wreck, honestly. So I want to read more because it's entertaining. I laughed so much while I read Trixie Belden, and a lot of the parts that I laughed at, I don't think were supposed to be funny. So I will say that I think I was maybe a little bit more entertained by Trixie Belden, but not in the way that the author intended. So overall, I like Nancy Drew as a series more than Trixie Belden still, but between these two books, I feel like The Secret of the Old Clock is honestly a very weak first installment for Nancy Drew. So if I'm going on to like read Nancy Drews and reread them in the future, I will probably just skip this one because I don't think it's that good. I think book 2 is better, but they get better the further on you go in the series, in my opinion. So I think I still like Nancy Drew better, and I'm sure that nostalgia is clouding that just a little bit, but Trixie Belden did end up being better than my expectations, especially considering the first part of the Trixie Belden book, where I was like, someone needs to take care of this bratty child. And someone still does need to take care of her, but she did become less bratty, so I have to give her that. Well, thank you for joining me for this vlog. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below if you have read Nancy Drew and or Trixie Belden. What do you think? Have you reread them as an adult? Because it definitely is a different experience reading Nancy Drew as an adult. There's lots of things that I'm like, yeah, like I can see that this is definitely much more written for children than it is for adults. But I have talked to some people that prefer Trixie Belden, and they grew up with both and they liked Trixie Belden better, which is part of the reason why I did this whole little experiment. So if you did read both growing up, I'm really curious to know which one you enjoyed more. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.